Hi, welcome to this new live stream of Venezuela Insider. Today is March 1st, March 1st of 2025. Yeah, we're having some technical difficulties here. Yeah, give me a second, please. Yeah, trying to fix this thing. Yeah, I don't know. Let me get this thing. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. It's supposed to be vertical, horizontal, whatever. Yeah, we'll have to go vertical again. Yeah, let's dive in on the news of the week. We had another busy week, not only in Venezuela, but also on, yeah, we got the issue in Iran. And yeah, and that is quite something. Today, we're not going to focus on that thing on the Middle East, but we are going to focus on how it will affect Venezuela. The rest, of the chart today is oil business, mostly, yeah. Also, how Iran affects the worldwide oil industry and how it will affect the Venezuelan economy and is poised to affect positively if this thing gets extended, if it's not somehow a particular, issue. Yeah, let me check something. I mean, yeah, I'm talking vertically. Let me do something right here. Yeah. But what happened? Yeah, I got some I got some technical difficulties, how it is being live. Yeah, okay. Quickly, what happened this week, in case you don't notice, you didn't watch the news, the United States struck on Iran and caused massive damage to the Iranian government, and they took out the leader of the country, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and apparently Iran will be on a transition. Also, the Iranian military struck on different places in the Middle East, the UAE, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and places, in the Middle East close to Iran and in retaliation. But here, the most important thing is that they announced that they will close the Strait of Hormuz, that is on the Persian Gulf, and on here on the Persian Gulf and throughout the Strait of Hormuz, over 20% of the worldwide crude oil supply pass. So it's a major choke point. Let alone that Iran is a significant oil producer overall. So the main point is that thanks to another Middle Eastern conflict, the oil industry worldwide is on a jeopardy, and that will affect first the oil prices, but most importantly, the dynamics of the worldwide oil supplies for major players like China. China apparently is kind of big of a deal here. Also, India, that is a major consumer of crude oil. Russia, that of course Russia is a producer, but with the issue with the war and you have a bunch of things going on over there. The European Union, that is a net importer of crude oil, and that creates mayhem that translates to the markets, to the oil futures, the WTI, the Brent, and the different kinds of crude oil. And now Venezuela is poised, if it's stable, to capitalize on this thing. First, you have to take into account that the Venezuelan GDP is heavily tied to the oil prices. So we got I mentioned this many times, that we got an estimate that the Venezuelan GDP should grow between 10 and 20%. I'm sorry, between 10 and 15%, the GDP, year over year in 2026, and also on the oil production between 30 and 40%. Now, this is before this major issue that we got in the Middle East, where the GDP growth could be higher just on the sheer fact of rises on the worldwide price of crude oil. And let's see, of course, if the Venezuelan economy can capitalize and revamp production quicker than expected. Now, the estimation right now is right now Venezuela is producing 1 million barrels of crude oil per day, give or take. The estimate, according to the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, we could reach 1.3, 1.4. And the infrastructure and the oil fields are there, just quick revamps that by the end of the year can increase the oil production in the country. That translates in, of course, more revenue for the country and therefore more GDP. And if you increase the oil prices worldwide, you are going to have a significant increases on the on the revenue for the country. Therefore, that translates on GDP, and that trickles down to the rest of the economy. Let's see if the mic is working. And yeah, historically, every time there is a major conflict in the Middle East, Venezuela capitalizes and the GDP grows. That happened a lot during the 70s on these wars with Israel and the Middle Eastern neighbors, and Yom Kippur War and the Six-Day Wars and whatever. That increased significantly the revenue and the economy of Venezuela overall. Back then in the 70s, I remember there was this catchphrase called the Saudi Venezuela. Venezuela was, the standards of living in Venezuela were actually excellent. Venezuela back then was top 10% regarding GDP per capita. And also still in the 70s, on 1979 is when they started the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and that created also mayhem that translated in Venezuela's GDP going up. So it's a very bullish news for Venezuela's economy overall. Now, we are on a bullish year in Venezuela significantly, and that can increase the growth, the delta that you have on such growth and such revenue. By the way, I was listening the other day to the main economic advisor of the former president Carlos Andrés Pérez, or CAP. He was a major guy, by the way, back then. He was a political celebrity in Venezuela. He passed away like 15 years ago or so. Well, funny thing is that the economic advisor, of course, is still alive. He was explaining just several months ago that during that tenure of the government and different governments on the 70s, that there was a significant cohort of the politicians back then that they were pushing for reducing the oil production back then. That was in the 70s, way before, Hugo Chavez and whatever. And the thing, they were poised to have terrible years, according to this economic advisor. And the thing that they saved the government back then, it was the first government of Carlos Andrés Pérez. And what saved the situation back then, it was the Iranian Revolution on 79. And that, of course, propped up the oil prices and increased, of course, the revenue and the GDP for Venezuela. Back then, but it was just kicking the can down the road. And by the 80s, everything, we got a major crisis in the economy on the early 1980s. Yeah, and that's when the trouble started to happen in Venezuela back then. Well, other moment, more recently, when Middle Eastern conflicts prop up the Venezuelan economy was on the 2010s. That's when we got the $100 barrel due to the invasion of the U.S. in Iraq and a bunch of these forever wars on the Middle East. And since the prices of crude oil were significantly higher, $100 per barrel most years, between 2003 and 2014 was the last time that we got $100 per barrel, give or take. And then that prop up artificially the Venezuelan economy. There were a lot of issues back then on the Venezuelan economy, this time with Hugo Chavez. But on the non-oil economy were a bunch of issues. However, since back then Venezuela still produced a little bit, give or take a little bit less of 3 million barrels of crude oil per day, that prop up the Venezuelan economy. Now, it's hard to explain a lot of bad things on that era, but you see on just sheer GDP numbers, you see the oil prices high. I mean, the Venezuelan GDP high back then, but still, situation in the street wasn't that great. And then when everything collapsed, the oil production, the oil prices, and whatever, and the political instability, well, we know the rest of the story. But the main point regarding the situation right now on Iran is that this event is bullish if it's sustained. Of course, I mean, this is a war and whatever. We don't want that as human beings. But indeed, if the situation extends, that can cause some mayhem to the worldwide oil industry. Yeah. And there will be some winners and losers, as always. Now, that was just in order to clear the Iran thing. Other news that we got this week is new oil contracts in the country. Not only oil, natural gas, actually. This week, the representatives of British Petroleum, BP, the British energy company, they visited Venezuela. They visited the president, Delcy Rodriguez, and apparently they are going to make, some investments. There was something that was on discussion from a while, but now they pulled the trigger. It was way back, like a couple of years. I remember I put it on the newsletter at some moment that BP will be developing an offshore natural gas reservoir that we have in the country. We have some natural gas in the country, and that is going to, and that next to other also other reservoirs in the country, that Repsol should be involved, and a couple joint ventures with Trinidad, because it's offshore, close to Trinidad. Trinidad is, of course, very close to Venezuela. Now, but the funny thing, though, is that Delcy Rodriguez, President Rodriguez, canceled several oil agreements that the former president, Nicolas Maduro, signed, and it was in effect just until recently. There were oil contracts with China, Chinese companies, also with some dubious companies from other countries or not so known players. And I'm not going to get into the speculation. But the most important ones were with Chinese companies and Chinese players. And right now, apparently, they are poised to be filled with American companies. Now, something that we have to discuss and see where those oil contracts will go. But the main point is that, indeed, apparently there's 180 right now regarding the, let's say, the optic of how the Venezuelan government will grant those new contracts. And of course, we have the thing with the sanctions that, as we speak, the sanctions are being toned down significantly, phased out, but not completely removed. Now, President Rodriguez, she is strongly pushing that all of the sanctions are removed, and not only the ones against PDVSA, the main state-owned oil company, but also against individuals on the Venezuelan government. This is something that we have explained several times. Well, and that's other major news. Also, we got this week the State of the Union speech in the United States by President Trump, of course, and on Congress. And Venezuela, since it was a major player on that particular speech, despite the fact that the State of the Union is something domestic, is in order to show the achievements of the Venezuelan people. I'm sorry, to the United States, Donald Trump, and the president, the current president, to their people that they are, improving things in the country, at least on their optics, whatever. And Venezuela was mentioned many times. First, of course, thanks to the operation of Maduro, the Operation Absolute Result, the pilot that was injured during the operation, Eric Slower, he got the Congressional Medal of Honor, so that's the highest distinction that a military can get in the United States. And the guy, of course, we see him, he's injured right now, he's disabled, but yeah, looks like a tough guy. Also, mentioned that the new best friend, the new buddy, and the new trading partner, Venezuela, is actually showing it as a good thing that right now the United States and Venezuela are close allies, and with President Rodriguez, I think it's good news. And they are doing oil deals, of course, that is favoring oil companies, U.S. oil companies. And so basically saying that Venezuela went from being a threat for national security to a trading partner in the continent, in the hemisphere. So those are excellent news for the Venezuelan economy, because just last year, this is a 180 compared to just last year when Trump talked about Venezuela, talked about Tren de Aragua, migration, talk about, of course, the drug deal of Maduro and whatever, and now he did a 180 and is mostly positive, and that's great for, I would say, both countries. It's excellent news for Venezuela's economy. We have, of course, like I said many times, we have an embassy after 7 years. We have an ambassador, Laura Dogu. That's excellent news. Also this week, this is important, the TSA visited the main airport in Venezuela, in Caracas, of course, and in order to supervise that this particular airport, the main airport in the country, is fitted in order to receive international flights from the United States. So we are getting very close on having direct flights between the US and Venezuela. Also, during the speech in the State of the Union, Trump mentioned that a lot of political prisoners have been released in the country, thanks to him. You know how Trump it is, it's all to me, thanks to me. Yeah, okay, and it's true, actually, in this case. And he gave, he invited to Congress, to the speech, one of the major political prisoners back then, Enrique Marquez, that he's a politician, center-right, that he was a former presidential candidate and had an issue with Maduro. Maduro arrested him, and then he was released just recently. And he got reunited with his family within, just there on the speech at the State of the Union in Congress. Okay, and yeah, so Trump basically selling the current status quo in Venezuela as a complete victory, and I think, yeah, I agree. And so far, so good. Let's see what happens. Let's see, we have more opportunities, and they materialize. That I think they will materialize. Now, other thing going on is international, major players, institutional investors are going in Venezuela as we speak. First, the bonds. I always talk about the bonds. They use the Venezuelan sovereign bonds as indicators on the country, and those are being, rising, like an altcoin or something like that, and they are steadily rising. And what doesn't mean that? Well, that the smart money, talking, big institutional investors, are, bullish on Venezuela. There is a saying that the dumb money goes to stocks and the smart money goes to bonds. So the smart money is, well, I've said this many times. The smart money is telling us invest in Venezuela. I've said this from, quite several months. And right now we just materialize that. This is according to JP Morgan and Bank of America. Also, on a particular conference in New York, we got JP Morgan, BlackRock, whatever, involved talking about the reconstruction of Venezuela. And also, one of the richest families historically in Venezuela, the Cisneros family, one of the main members, Adriana Cisneros, she is raising $1 billion for investing in the country in order to, rebuild the country after, all of the shenanigans that destroyed it on the first place. So, on that regard, excellent news. However, the time window in order to invest in Venezuela, I won't say it's closing, and I don't like to doing the FOMO or whatever, but right now the opportunity that you have right now, if you're watching this, is that if you're a retail investor, regardless if you're a high net worth individual or not, and since you are a retailer guy, you are having this opportunity because you have more flexibility in order to invest in the country compared to a major, institutional player. However, that time window, that time frame is closing and closing and closing, and it will be just, I would say, until the end of the year. So it's better to be moving on this thing. Don't sleep on it. I mean, just do the due diligence, hustle, work, whatever, as these, entrepreneurial gurus say, or whatever. But the main, so right now things are going faster and faster and faster. And one last thing that I want to cover today is a major poll made by Atlas Intel. Let me see if I can check it. Atlas Intel is the most accurate pollster in the United States on the past two election cycles. That they were the most accurate, predicting both the election of Donald Trump and then Joe Biden, including the midterms, of course. So on that regard, Atlas Intel is right now working in Venezuela. They established one of the bases. Atlas Intel is from Brazil, I believe, and they have, of course, big presence in the United States and several other countries in Latin America, including Brazil, of course. And yeah, let me check here. Now, if you are going to do polls in Venezuela, there are a lot of nuances that you need to check, that you need to, gauge in order to have the most accurate readings. Because if you don't, you're going to have the margin of error is going to be greater. And this is something that I'm seeing that Atlas Intel is not correct. Now, these guys are very good. I know they will correct this. But let's go with the polls, shall we? It's mostly political and social. The first poll is the presidential approval in February 2026. Delcy Rodriguez disapproval stands at 44.3%, a percentage higher than her approval of 37%. That is actually very high. And 18.7% respond, I don't know. And that's the key, knowing why people respond, I don't know. According to the Political Risk Index made by Atlas Intel, in February, Venezuela recorded the lowest political risk index amongst the countries considered by Latam polls. Of course, apparently Venezuela just joined this thing recently, so it's useless for now. Consumer Confidence Index, and this will be important, Venezuela was also the country that recorded the highest consumer confidence amongst the countries considered by Latin polls. So great. And economic situation on the street, current economic evaluations of the labor market, one of family situations, and the national economy shows notably negative balance. So regarding the economic situation, for families, 34% against 54%, so it's a minus 20. Labor market, only 17% says it's great, and 17% thinks it's negatively, so it's a negative 54 points. And in the country overall, 17% says it's on favor against 72%, so it's a minus 55 percentage points. Yeah, so right now, the current situation, according to the polls of Atlas Intel, the current situation is not great for the average Venezuelan, but the future expectations are significantly higher. So the people right now are not great, but they are bullish for the future. Okay, Atlas Intel has a couple of polls on that. Economic expectations, this is important. However, economic expectations regarding these same economic dimensions for the next 6 months are largely positive. So, on the country overall, for the country overall, 78% think it's going to be better against just 5%, so it's a plus 73% percentage points. For families, 77% against just 6%, so it's a plus 71. And labor market, 73% against 6% plus 77%. So Venezuelans right now consider that the average Venezuelan, according to Atlas Intel, they consider that right now they don't, on the spot, don't have a great situation, but on the future they will have. And I agree. Main problems in Venezuela, according to Atlas Intel, corruption is identified as the main problem in Venezuela by almost 57% of respondents. It is followed by weakening of democracy, mentioned by 37%. People, then in number 3, we have poverty, unemployment, and lack of opportunities at 35%. And healthcare at 25%, judicial system 23%, external threats, wars and terrorism, that's what it says here, 16%, change on traditional values 13%, education 13%, authoritarianism 9.8%, political extremists 8.3%, hyperinflation, 7.9%, fiscal and finance, 7.4%, not that much. Insecurity, criminality, and drug dealers, 6.9%. Migration, that is, I mean, this is not the US, this is not Texas, only 4.9%. Degradation of the environment, so not too much green AOC people, 2.4%, and racism, homophobia, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism at 0.8%. So the woke issues are not major, nor are not mainstream in Venezuela. The image of political leaders. This is arguably the most interesting thing about this, and has been very controversial actually, on both sides of the aisle. According to the Atlas Intel, the Marco Rubio leads the image of political figures list, posting a positive net image of 35%. Maria Corina Machado and Donald Trump are tied in second place. Nicolas Maduro and Delcy Rodriguez recorded negatively net image rankings. So let's go quickly, one by one. Marco Rubio has 57%, is the highest, against 27, so it's a plus 35. Maria Corina Machado's 56%, against 28, so it's a plus 28%. Donald Trump, 53%, against 25 is plus 28 also, of course. Edmundo González Urrutia, the opposition presidential candidate that won or whatever, 51% against 28 plus 23. And afterwards, the rest of the list is net negative. The highest is Delcy Rodriguez, the interim president. 29% up is higher than most people expected, against 56% of disapproval, minus 27. Celia Flores, the former First Lady, 25% against 61% is minus 36. Nicolas Maduro, the former president, 22% against 64%. It's actually better than I thought. And minus 42%. Delcy Rodriguez's brother, Jorge Rodriguez, the president of the Speaker of the House, let's say, 20% of approval and minus 65% of disapproval. So it's a minus 45 net. And then we got some weaker opposition leaders, like Leopoldo Lopez, 8% of approval against 73% of disapproval in the country, minus 65. Sorry. Enrique Capriles, 6% of approval against 80% of disapproval, minus 74%. So, and the worst politician or the least liked politician in Venezuela is Juan Guaidó, the former interim president, 6% of approval against over 80% of disapproval rate, minus 74 points. So these weak opposition leaders, Capriles, Guaidó, and Leopoldo Lopez, are even worse than the Chavismo leaders, that they have some sort of base. Meanwhile, these people, these opposition candidates, I mean, they are really despised, virtually with no political capital in the country. And it has been very controversial this week amongst, analysts and talking heads on Venezuelan politics. Now, according to Atlas Intel, situation in Venezuela. In February 2026, 51.5% of Venezuelan respondents said that they believe in Venezuela is currently doing better than when Maduro was president. 30.1% said Venezuela is the same as when Maduro was in charge. And only 3.6% said that Venezuela right now is worse compared to when Maduro was in charge. So that is, it's quite something. I wasn't expecting that bad. The other poll is the influence of the United States. 62.4% of respondents believe that the increase in the United States' influence over the Venezuelan government since Maduro's capture is a positive change, just against 7.4% that says that it's a negative change. Okay. Number 10 is civil liberty. 52.1% of Venezuelan respondents said that they perceive an increase in civil liberties in the country. The remaining 47.9% disagree or say that they don't know. Other thing is democratic establishment. 21.1% believe that Venezuela is becoming much more democratic, and 39.2% believe it's becoming a bit more democratic. 21% do not see any democratic progress, and 18.6% are unsure on how they feel about the country's democratic trajectory. So, we're a thing, and yeah, the rest, Atlas Intel has, I think, more news on that. But anyways, very interesting the polls on Atlas Intel. Like I said, they need to calibrate because Venezuela is a particular tricky market in order to run polls. But I think they're on the right track, but they need to improve some things. Now, these guys are superstars on their trade. They are the most accurate in the United States. But I believe that it's going to take like a year of calibration for Atlas Intel in order to get the right, the margin of error, get it surgical. They always do in other markets. So very interesting. I'm very excited that seeing Atlas Intel. I'm a big fan of Atlas Intel. I was way before that they came to the country. And yeah, another last minute news that we have to read here is, well, it's political. I don't like to talk about politics that much. But apparently, Maria Corina Machado gave a press conference and she announced that in Washington, and she announced that she will return in the country soon. Let me let me get you the let me get you the date. I have it here. It's was just before I started recording. Yeah. I got it. In few weeks, we will see each other in Venezuela, according to Maria Corina Machado, but I don't have the exact date. So let's see what happens on that regard. Well, I think that will be all for this week. Thank you again for your attention. We'll see each other on the next live stream next Sunday, hopefully. And yeah, tomorrow, of course, we have our weekday agenda. Every video, we're gonna have a new video every day by 6 a.m. Eastern time, 7 p.m. Venezuelan time. Then it's gonna change very soon, the daylight savings or whatever. So yeah, I have to check my schedule on that regard. Well, thanks again for your attention. We'll see each other on the next video.